the takeaway. That's the interesting thing too. Think of it from that perspective. Say you believe this. How do you go live your life? You know, that's one of those interesting things when people have this aversion to the idea that they're God. You know, they can do whatever they want. Why would that be offensive to you? And it's because you believe something perverse about yourself or about human nature. You know what I'm saying? Well, if that were true, everyone could just do it and it would be all, no. You know what I mean? We've lived under repressive ideologies now since forever, and that hasn't prevented people from doing terrible things. You know, the only thing that's going to prevent someone from doing terrible things is utter responsibility. That's it. Utter, inescapable responsibility. Right? Do what you want, you know? And the consequences are yours. Talk the way you want to talk inside your head, you know? I'm not here to tell you to talk inside your head in a particular way or to make certain pictures. You know what I mean? It's just you do it and you get what you get, right? And that's it. And there's no conversion element to it either. It's like Alan Watts. It's like the birds singing. I mean, that's what he says is that people that sort of, you know, the terminology is called to discipleship, right? Conversion isn't the imperative. The imperative is just the sharing of the information. Here's some information. Well, I don't like that. That's fine. That's one of the acceptable reactions. You know what I'm saying? There's no, and people who really understand that there is no or else. There is no believe this or something bad is going to happen to you, right? The only threat is believe this and test this, or don't and live having not believed it and not tested it. That's right. The only consequences you're going to face are the consequences that are intrinsic to the things that you do and don't do. I don't need to make up some kind of, you know, punishment for you. It's stupid. You know, you're going to go to hell if you don't believe that you're God. Well, that seems dumb, right? I mean, and so there is, and one of the nice things about it too is that it's sort of the ultimate in sort of spiritual fuck you money, in the sense that to the extent that you believe that this is true, it makes no difference to you whether someone else believes that it's true or not. And it makes no difference to you what someone else thinks of you as a result of you sharing it. I mean, what do I care? What have I to do with you? Nothing. Like, what does your opinion of me have to do with my destiny or with the way that my life is going to go? It's got nothing to do with it. And so I'm totally indifferent to what you think about what I say, or to what you might think about me as a result of my saying it. And therefore, I have no incentive to say anything other than what I believe to be true and what my personal experience has revealed to me. And people don't like that. You know, people are so unaccustomed to hearing the understandings of the unadulterated understandings of people who have no incentive to deceive them about what their beliefs are, that when they hear it, it comes as a shock. I mean, this is this thing with Jesus, you know, and they're looking for Jesus in the garden, and, you know, he says, I am he, you know, and they all fall down, you know what I mean? It's this sort of, it's been so long since you've ever heard anyone be unabashedly honest with you. You know what I'm saying? That it's a shocking thing. That people sugarcoat it, or they dilute it a little bit, or they say, well, you can live a good life if you do things this way, or, you know what I mean? There's a compromising because people aren't ready to hear it. Well, people's readiness to hear something is not relevant. And I think that's one of those important things, too. You become this kind of Pharisee-type character, or this kind of manipulative, you know, we better make sure that people can understand it. We better make sure people are ready and that they understand it. They've been properly prepared and all the. No, that's not what the instruction was, and that's not what good sense says to do. Good sense just says relate your experience. Just relate your experience, and let them come and let them go and let them do whatever they want to do. You know, they're going to do it anyway. They're going to think what they think anyway. You just show up and say what you know from personal experience to be true, and allow people to respond to it however they do. And that's that. And they may not know that how they feel about what you're saying is okay, but if you do, then you don't need them to know it's okay in order for you to know it's okay. And then you're really free to, you know, scatter the seed, right? But everyone's got these stupid rules that they have to filter it through, and tradition, and you know, there's a lot of, I don't know. I mean, there's this secular outgrowing of kind of rabbinical tradition. You know what I'm saying? About oh, but that's this and that's that, well, we have to honor this, and oh, I read this book in my humanities class said you have to do this, and culturally, and no one recognizes that these are the things of the world. This is this dumb shit that people have been concerned about from time immemorial, right? This is the way society operates, and this is, well, the historical context of this, and our culture, we have to watch out for that, and all. It's stuff in fucking cats and jars, and it's the same stuff. Stupid nonsense. Do this to make God happy, do this to make sure this is right. We want to justify this, and we want to make this fair, and we want to do all this different, and we're going to oppress people in the name of justice, you know what I'm saying? And we're going to seek justice by oppressing those people, and we're going to fight and clamor and argue, and I've got my identity and you've got yours, and mine's legitimate, but yours isn't because of these reasons, or yours isn't legitimate because you don't acknowledge mine's legitimate, and blah, 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 blah. And someone else says, no, that's wrong, it's tradition, we have to do it this way. Someone else says, no, it's the new tradition that's going to save the world, you know what I'm saying? And it's all fucking stupid. And anybody who's paying attention to it knows it's fucking stupid, right? You look within yourself and look how miserable you are. You're fighting with these people, right? That's misuse of your mind. You can believe it or not, I don't care. You know what I mean? Because I think that there's a certain number of people that are going to understand that, and there's a certain number that aren't. And I don't really plan on spending a lot of time in the comment section trying to persuade those that don't, because it doesn't matter, right? It would be a misuse of my mind to be concerned about that. It would be like a bird flying down onto your shoulder and lecturing you about how you should be paying more attention to the song than singing. Just would never happen. A bird is too smart for that. You know what I mean? You just sing the song, and then somebody gets mad. Yeah, too bad. I'm up in this tree. You can't get me. You know what I mean? And I think that's just kind of the way that it is. I don't think that you adopt this kind of teaching because you want to make a lot of friends, or because you want to be understood by a lot of people, or highly regarded socially. You know what I mean? That's why you better fucking test it, make sure it works, so that it doesn't matter what people think about you, and so that you can tell them about it. You know what I mean? People are. I just think that everyone is deficient. They're deprived, right? They are disadvantaged in that they're starving for people who will say things to them without regard for what their reaction to those things are going to be. Now, that's to be inflammatory as a strategy for making money or becoming a personality is not what I'm talking about. That's not someone who's saying things without regard for what other people's reactions are going to be. They want a specific reaction, and they go out of their way to get it. You see what I'm saying? And on the other hand, people who edit their reactions in order to kind of the news talking heads, right? That they say the most absurd things, but they do it in a way that is designed to avoid any of the booby traps they themselves have set, right? So they contort themselves into these grotesque, parodies of reason, but they manage to avoid stepping on any hot buttons, and so they don't offend anyone, and they can keep cashing their check and making their money and keep being on TV because they say things that are so devoid of content that no one can be offended by them. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I don't think anyone has a hard time digesting one of these frozen sugar water popsicles. It might not be good for you, but no one has a hard time digesting it. It's not like a piece of roughage that you have to have some digestive vitality to be able to deal with. I don't think anyone gets a stomach ache or something like that from one of these sugar pops because it's just right through. That's the kind of information that the ear ticklers like to dispense. And so people have grown up and they've heard people who want to impress them with what a hard ass they are, and they've heard people who want to be regarded as some kind of impressive religious figure, and they've heard people who are trying to sell them shit, and they've heard people who are trying to piss them off because pissing them off is part of getting another group to be on board with them. You know what I'm saying? And they've heard people who are fucking terrified of being labeled some socially unacceptable thing. They've heard that kind of a person feed them information that's designed to avoid triggering certain accusations from them. They've heard all of these different deceptive people who are doing everything they can to be appropriate for their own selfish interests, because they don't want the consequences of your wrath and the 100 million other people that are just like you, right? they've never heard from anyone who just doesn't give a shit. It's so rare to hear from somebody who really truly understands that their personal destiny is utterly unrelated to what the hearer's opinion of them and their teachings are, right? It's an uncommon thing to come into contact with somebody who has a clear understanding of the fact that what you think of me doesn't fucking matter. And it's not that it doesn't matter because you aren't important, right? It's because at no point does your opinion become the stuff out of which my world is made. And I know that. And it hits different when someone who understands that says things to you. And some people can't handle it. But to me, that's like, you give a 3-year-old horseradish, they don't like it. I mean, what are you going to outlaw horseradish? Or are you going to say, well, try it again when you're 12, try it again when you're 20, try it again when you're 40? You know what I mean? There's a certain maturity. And you see this, though. Sometimes young people will hear this and they resonate with it. They're young, according to sort of what Neville talks about Caesar's time. You know what I mean? But the ears are ready, right? The mental soil is prepared to hear it. So they do. And then you hear old people who react like a toddler. And you're supposed to respect them because they've been acting like a toddler for longer than this other person's been very wise. You know what I mean? Sorry. But that idea that says, the same people who have their kid and they bring their child over to a neighbor's house and the neighbor's prepared some meal that the child either doesn't like or with which they're unfamiliar, there's Brussels sprouts or something like that, and the person encourages the child to try it, and then the child spits it out and says, ew, and the parent rebukes the child for their impoliteness. This is the same person who gets on a post on Facebook, right, and says, oh, this is offensive. Don't you understand how stupid you are? No, you don't, which is why you're as stupid as you are. Don't you understand? You don't. And that's your problem. But it's not mine. Now, you see what I'm saying? And that's an interesting voice. I mean, it is, and it reminds me, nothing has changed. The world hasn't changed since preschool. I remember in preschool that you had shy children that were terrified of upsetting anybody, and then you had angry children who just wanted to kind of see the room burn, and then you had provocateurs that wanted just to stir up trouble. You had tattlers, you had people that were, you had the virtue, the kind of exhibitionistically virtuous. Well, they had them all, and they've all gotten bigger, but they haven't really grown up. They're all basically the same, and they're running around and fighting each other and trying to feel successful in some way or right in some way, or expiate some sin or achieve some advantage over somebody else or over some form of version of themselves or secure their income source. You know what I'm saying? And it's also obvious that it's just gross. I think it's one of these things that it's funny to me that people have weird opinions about like prostitutes or strippers and people like this. I think that people tend to resent them because they're very candid in the nature of their business. There's not a lot of obfuscation that's going on in that business. It's pretty straightforward. You know what I'm saying? There's an honesty there. And obviously there's a lot of different things that go on, but assuming that there's someone who's making a choice. Like I heard a podcast with a woman that made a conscious choice to go work at the Bunny Ranch, I think, and she's making like $80,000 a month, and she's very happy with that, and she considers this to be, she's pretty pleased. Eric Weinstein did an interview with somebody like a porn star that started her own business and all this different stuff, and she's not stupid. You know what I'm saying? She's got her own business and she's branching out into other things and investing in all this different stuff. And it doesn't really matter what you think about what she's doing, and she knows that. But I think even people who partake of these industries, the fruits of these industries, sometimes have attitudes toward them of it being unsavory or some sense that there's something about it that's not totally upright. And I think it's the lack of obfuscation. Do you know what I'm saying? That they aren't swaddling themselves in some veneer of high-mindedness. You know what I mean? And so I think it's useful in that respect to usually a tendency to judge somebody else. I feel as though it's an indictment of oneself, right? And of one's own consciousness. And that's that's one of those things that you just have to test for yourself. But when you see something, doesn't mean that when you see something you don't like, that's an indictment of you. I don't necessarily think that's true. But if you see something and your reflexive reaction is to judge or to condemn, that to me is like you being in the living room and smelling smoke coming out of the kitchen. You know, it indicates something to me, and I'm sure as hell going to go look. Now maybe it's just some burning toast and it's not a big deal. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, not many people want to hear this stuff. One of the interesting things about it too, though, is the fact that so many people are like, I guess I used to think my grandma was different, or like she was like an old lady, and like old ladies were a certain way. But I see so many people that I knew as very young people. I like this. I thought this was a nice car, but it's just a regular car. That are basically the same as my grandmother was. You know what I'm saying? And they seem it's like stuck up and kind of, it's not stuck up, but kind of like old and stuffy and kind of like, you know, well, Stephen, you know, it's all this tradition and all this different stuff. You see it start cropping up in people as they start getting into it's funny, their 30s. It's like the early 30s is the time when there's this like algae bloom of inherited bullshit in the minds of people, and about the way you like that?
Yeah.
And about the way they think about their world. You know, they talk about like sleeper cells, terrorist sleeper cells, or like in that, you know, the Americans show that we were hearing about, that you have these spies that like they may not even be spying. They're just plants, and they can be activated at any time. People have these traditional ideas about reality and about the world, and about, well, you have to well, this, you can't say that, and you can't just you know. People will tell you that you can't just change the way you think about things. You can't just do that. And you can tell, and you know from firsthand, that they never have tried changing anything about the way they think. And you wonder then how it is they manage to feel so certain about what a change of mind can't achieve. You know, same thing, people who've been eating the same, you know, dog shit food their whole life, they know for certain that you couldn't improve health by changing your diet. They just know it. They know it, and that's, you know, it's really hard to liberate somebody from a misconception when they know that the thing that isn't true is true. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so, it's an interesting thing to look for the people who are ready and willing to hear this stuff and to take on the responsibility that comes from it. You know. I mean, like you said, like the indignant responses from the teaching that you are God, you know, that these people, they're not responding indignantly out of some deeply held moral concern that they have about negative consequences that such a belief might have. And they're not upset by that belief because they really are convinced that it's not true. They're upset by it because they don't like the idea of being that responsible for everything about their life and about what's going on in their world. And their dishonesty is laid bare in the fact that they don't come right out and say that. They, you know, fulminate this righteous indignation or this rational, thoughtful sort of argument against it, or this, well, you just, and they get their labeler out and they start putting, that's a New Age cult idea. And that's one of those things that there are these catch-all phrases and terms that are no-nos. That's bad. That's a this, that's a that, right? That's a privilege. That's privilege there. Well, privilege is such a fungible, it's a broad and general term, and it kind of means nothing, and thus can be made to mean anything. And so it's kind of like one of these tools that you can do anything with. You know what I'm saying? And so if somebody says something I don't like, I just call it that, and then I kind of confabulate some vague explanation about how it is that. And then if the person doesn't accept it, I say, well, that's an example of it too. See, you're doing it right. The fact that you didn't accept my dog shit explanation for why what you were doing is that is just more evidence of that. Now, can you imagine if the people that thought this framework up tried to build airplanes? I mean, what the world would be like? Can you imagine? I mean, can you imagine the state of mathematics if this was the quality of thinking that was applied to it? You know what I mean? And so they just throw these things out, and I'm just like, oh, you're just demonstrating to me here the depths of your depravity. Like the manner in which you're arguing reveals to me that you are an inveterately dishonest person. That your recalcitrance reaches depths that I couldn't plumb if I had 10 lifetimes to do it. And therefore I'm not going to spend even a second in an attempt to do so. I have a water hose here, it's going to spray cool, refreshing, clean mountain spring water, and you're covered in dog shit. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time trying to convince you to let me spray you off. I'm just not, because it doesn't make that much of a difference to me. Do you know what I'm saying? You're going to be gone. I'm going to still have my water, and you're still going to be covered. And and at some time, this is the Lord causing the famine to come upon the land. At some point within you, there's a desire to be free from your bullshit. But until that time comes, I'm not going to intrude on you, because no, and see, this isn't even dismissive. This isn't even like one up on someone like this. Truly, to deprive someone of the personal experience of walking around covered in nonsensical dog shit, right, is to deprive them of an important component of their awakening process. Do you know what I'm saying? And maybe they need somebody to argue with them about how they should be sprayed off in order to wake up. But that person doesn't have to be me. See, if it were my role to do that, I wouldn't have had certain realizations about the futility of doing it. There's someone out there dumb enough to argue with you, dumb as you are, right? You just gotta find that person. It's just not me. Same with dating, right? It's like, someone rejects you. You don't find fault with that person or find fault with yourself. You say it's just not a match, and the more you kind of realize, I'm just looking for a fight, or I'm just looking for a sense of superiority or a sense of inferiority. It doesn't sound like this guy is willing to give it to me. Well, then you just go find someone else if that's what you want to do, and then have an experience, and then that experience pushes you forward somewhere else. You know what I mean? Like, and then you move forward from there. But it's just sort of one of those interesting things where it's such a relief to other people. Not accepting responsibility for their lives ceases to be an issue for you the moment you accept full responsibility for yours. Do you know what I mean? And that's, it's just get that log out of your eye. It's still there, because it's very easy for anyone. It's very easy for me to watch the news or and what happens is when you stop going out and looking for this stuff, a lot of the times it knocks on your door and introduces itself to you. Someone comes into your living room, or they come into your teaching center or whatever, and then they start spewing their stuff. You know what I mean? And it's very easy in situations like that to begin to make a false idol, basically, and to say, well, now everything about my life is coming from me, and it's all my consciousness pushed out, but you really should not be here, right? And it comes from limitations of self. When you imagine that there's a limit to your power, immediately there is an incentive to begin to conceive of limitations to your responsibility. Do you understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. The moment that there's something that you aren't able to do, the moment that there's some outside force other than you, other than your consciousness, other than your beingness, there's a speck of sand on Jupiter, right? That doesn't have anything to do with me. And I've got a pain in my eye, and I think that it somehow got, you know what I'm saying? That the moment there's something other than myself, 0.001% not me. Not that there's, this is why what is it? The Shema, you know what I mean? I'm pretty sure BJP mispronounces it. But is, what is it? Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God, the Lord is one. Why is this the first confession of faith? The most important fucking thing there is, right? So that you don't start blaming other shit that is your responsibility. That's it. Because as soon as there's one thing, and it's only 0.0001% of what exists, but it's not you, well, it is responsible for 100%. It will eventually be responsible for 100% of the problems. You know what I'm saying? Mm. It's an in-group, out-group thing from a secular perspective. As soon as there is an out-group, it's the out-group's fault. As soon as you can justify, it's clearly them. And if they didn't exist, we wouldn't have any of these problems. Well, let's just kill them. The problem, of course, is that you kill them, and then all of a sudden there's another, the remaining in-group is then divided. Do you know what I'm saying? And that's this kind of proliferation of gods. That's this proliferation of causes. That's this, well, consciousness may be the only cause, but we really need to go fix this thing over here. But I need to persuade this person to change their behavior by talking to them and threatening them in coercing them. Did you imagine them already having changed? You know, when you decided to have the conversation with them, what was your conception of them? What were you thinking of them? What were your ideas about them in that moment in time? Were you looking at the facts and looking at the history and defining them and conceiving them and consenting in consciousness to this undesirable idea that you had about them? Well, you're not doing it. You're not adhering to this teaching. Now, if you don't want to do that, that's fine, but I want to point out that you are in fact violating the teaching now, right? And because I think that the violation occurs without knowing it. This is the people, that perish, I think, really, for lack of knowledge. And it's very often, it's not lack of knowledge of the principle, it's lack of knowledge of the extent to which you're violating the principle in every moment of your life. You're doing it, you're doing it, you're doing it. You're sitting here telling me about how you're not doing it, and in so doing, you are doing it. I fear I have labored over you in vain. I've never identified with an apostle more, right, than that. I fear that I have labored over you in vain. And that's a feeling of anybody who tries to teach anyone, and it's a feeling of anybody who tries to do work on themselves. Like the awareness, like when you catch yourself doing it, and it's like the 100th time, and it's after you were certain you weren't doing it, and it's after you were certain this was an exception, and it was after having somehow convinced yourself that this really was different, and you hold, there is a kind of cognitive dissonance where you believe the principle, but you also believe you found an exception, even though the principle states there are no exceptions to the principle, right? This feeling, and then you suddenly see the depths of your depravity, which is to say, you see your deviation, you see the self-deception, you see the enemy that's in your own house that is yourself. You recognize it, and there's a feeling inside. Well, one, there's a feeling of thrill. There's a happiness there. There's a recognition, where it's sort of like, oh, this wasn't an exception, and that's great. But the fact that it isn't an exception means that I'm pretty devious, which is not so great. And there is a feeling inside of this, I fear I've labored over you in vain, which is, I thought I was really making some progress here, and yet I see I'm still capable of doing the same basic thing. And so, who wants to spend the time to do this kind of work? Don't you just want 4 steps to this, 6 steps to this? Don't you just want to go to a seminar that'll make you feel better about yourself and your role in the world, and that will allow you to believe that you're doing your part to make the world a better place? Don't you just want more Instagram? You know what I mean? Like, truly, like, who wants to bother with this? And there's a certain number of people who do, and that's who I'm interested in talking to, and the rest of them, whatever.